Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something gnarlier than your uncle's fishing stories. Life in a medieval castle. Not the glamorous castles of fairy tales where princes kiss sleeping beauties. No, I'm talking about the real medieval deal. Cold stone walls, questionable hygiene, and a diet that resembles the aftermath of a failed science experiment. So before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy it, of course. And I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Always interesting to see the time zones of fellow insomnia warriors. Now, dim the lights, perhaps flick on a fan for that gentle hum, and find a comfy position. Just be careful about where you put your feet. They say medieval floors are real-life versions of Russian roulette. Have you ever thought about what it was like to wake up with a bunch of curious lice as your alarm clock? What was breakfast like when the highlight of your day was a few days old gruel? And if you fell ill, how did the doctors cure you? By feeding you leeches or perhaps some delightful heirloom mould? Now let's drop you into the chaos. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a medieval castle. The year is 1302, and the air is colder than a peasant's smile after a bad harvest. Good luck. Waking up in medieval times isn't like snoozing to the sound of a gentle chime. It's more akin to having a goat bleat in your ear while someone transports you to the land of the living through a bucket of cold water. Your alarm? A rusty church bell clanging outside, and it's far less forgiving than your modern-day smartphone, which, by the way, doesn't exist here. Instead, you have a wooden plank of a bed, ironically dubbed luxurious by the standards of the time, covered in straw that is simultaneously your mattress, blanket, and mysterious bug sanctuary. Every morning marks a fresh start, or as fresh as it gets when your bed is literally a breeding ground for critters who have mistaken you for their royal host. You gradually roll out of your stockpile of misery, your body complaining as if it just enrolled in a medieval torture program. The floor beneath you is either a cold slab of stone, or slightly warmer thanks to the flavours of recent meals left to ferment. Take your pick. Each step onto the floor sends a delightful chill up your spine as you gracefully inch your way towards the door, stubbing your toe on the nearest furniture relic, an antique collection of whoever made this really didn't care about anyone's comfort. At this point, you almost start to miss the whole bedroom privacy concept you were accustomed to. But alas, such luxuries are reserved for nobles, who still deal with their own special set of problems as it turns out. Now it's time to embrace the day, and nothing screams optimism like the thought of, where's the nearest toilet? Unfortunately, it's more of an adventure, and certainly not a solo mission. Sharing a wooden bucket becomes the ultimate test of family bonding, akin to a game of hot potato, but in this case with more unsavoury outcomes. The thrill of giving your morning offering becomes a display of community spirit, complete with the exciting chant "Gardy-loo" as you dramatically toss any refuse out of the window, like an ancient form of recycling. The streets await with eager anticipation as those who have the pleasure of walking below dodge the projectiles of yesterday's dinner. Thankfully, the local hygiene is questionable enough that audiences have become accustomed to navigating the hazardous landscape of human waste. Having survived that formidable feat, the next step in our adventure of morning rituals leads us to the grand dining experience, or lack thereof. Breakfast appears in the form of pottage, which is practically the medieval cousin of cereal colloquially known as surprise stew. Would it be traditional porridge? An amorphous lump of vegetables? Perhaps a hint of roadkill seasoning? Who could possibly tell any more? You hesitant fork through unidentifiable lumps, desperately trying to convince your stomach that it resembles 2-day-old leftovers from a banquet that never quite happened. Just remember, don't expect anything remotely fresh. The menu primarily consists of whatever was still breathing in the pot when you last looked. After ploughing through your morning gruel, it's time to adorn your legally required nice outfit, which is, surprise, Literally one wool tunic, dizzyingly similar to yesterday's. That means today you'll be sporting the lovely fragrance of unwashed clothing and a body that hasn't seen a washcloth in ages. If you're lucky, perhaps you can negotiate that someone didn't promptly return a blanket shirt that could have been worse in its state of odour. Of course, layering doesn't really count as fashion here. It's more of a survival technique designed to keep you clothed enough to evade arrest by the local lord for indecency. Not that he has any basis for a complaint. Finally dressed, sort of. It's a mad dash to your responsibilities, be it in the fields, the forge, or the delightful rabbit hole of chores. You take a cautious glance in the mirror, or rather a reflective puddle, hoping to catch a glimpse of potential nobility. What greets you is not a shining knight ready for glorious battles, but a bedraggled peasant staring back, questioning every life choice that led you to this moment. Truly, getting ready for the day has never felt more like preparatory surgery than putting on clothes and fleeing the horror that is medieval living. As you shuffle outside, you can't help but wish for modern amenities, like toothbrushes, deodorant, or air conditioning, and silently curse whatever fate decided to drop you squarely into the murky depths of the past. Ah, yes, the Renaissance of early days, when life was brutal, mornings were torturous, and the only thing sure was that every day might just surprise you in its level of misery. Who needs a snooze button when you can get the full medieval wake-up experience? You still think you miss modern bathrooms? Well, welcome to your new history lesson. The concept of privacy is as foreign as a unicorn in your backyard. It's simply not an option. If you're lucky, you have a wooden bucket in the back, which you share with your family and potentially a visiting chicken. Your instructions: just let it fly while shouting "Gardy-loo" as a courtesy to anyone walking below. You might even be brave enough to test the communal toilet, but expect that seating arrangement to be more intimate than Thanksgiving dinner with your in-laws, and definitely less hygienic. Now, if you're one of the folks living in a castle, or rather a fortified residence, let's pause for a second. Sure, the walls might be tall, the turrets might be grand, and the moat might be a fashionable addition, but your toilet arrangements would scare even the most seasoned survivalist. Your bathroom is essentially a hole in the floor with a great view of the courtyard below, perfect for ensuring your mess doesn't contribute to indoor decor. But wait, you're not off the hook yet. The castle's overworked servants will be the ones to deal with your donations, while simultaneously hoping they don't end up as the next meal for the castle cats. And for the ladies visiting the castle, good luck. There's no line for the ladies' room here, just a band of brave souls huddling in a dimly lit chamber. The comradeship is real, sharing horror stories about the last time you accidentally sat on a wasp instead of a seat. You quickly learn that social etiquette requires you not only to ignore each other's smells, but also to appraise the condition of the latrine. Are their wooden seats splintery enough to merit emergency treatment? More than once, you could find yourself making hasty decisions on whether you can hold it until the next opportunity presents itself, or if you must risk the poultry-infested bucket in the corner. Speaking of risk, let's dive deeper into what happens if you stray just a little too far from the communal facilities. What's that? You'd prefer to use a secluded spot away from the rabble? That's all well and good until you find yourself knee-deep in bushes. Ah, yes. Venturing into the dark and dingy corners for some natural relief means you will share that space with more than just weeds and the occasional constipated cow. Nature's call can lead you to sudden surprises, a high chance of rats scuttling away, or maybe even the farmer's legendary angry goat. Hope you packed your combat boots because you might need them. And as you navigate your bowel-kneading misery, let's all remember that ladies picked up a distinct talent for interesting manoeuvrability, especially if they needed to escape the prying eyes of their neighbours. Let's face it, your royals or lords might feel above such primal activities, but they do have a stylish way of handling their mean business. A private chamber emptied into the moat. Now that sounds like the sophisticated solution for nobility. Just be careful when you flush. Your enemies could be lurking beneath the surface, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. The whole experience is truly an invitation to wonder how the transit system of waste disposal could be so creative yet chaotic. The streets of towns are often the remnants of someone else's daily dining experience, creating a lovely symphony of scents that could make even the strongest stomach turn. Imagine walking through the neighbour's back alley, only to suddenly regret that second helping of turnip stew from last night's dinner. Now wait a second. With all this toilet horror, one could argue that these peasant facilities prepare you for life in the thick of things. Armed with a vigilant nature and a nose for trouble, you might even find yourself developing a bond with the folks around you, as you stand shoulder to shoulder, making small talk while trying to avoid leaning into each other's spaces or engaging in accidental contact during the most intimate of moments. Fortitude is key. Do you dare to be this close together? So if you need a moment to relax, consider it one less moment you spend judging medieval toilets and comfort. Indeed, life during this time teaches you that while you may lose your dignity in the process, you'll forge friendships with fellow bathroom patrons that can rival any of the high and mighty novels of the time. Just remember to lower your expectations, because sometimes a throne is just a toilet waiting to be conquered. Now that you've relieved yourself of yesterday's soup-turned sculpture, it's time for breakfast. Spoiler alert, it's not the pancake and bacon feast you were dreaming of. Instead, you're served a bowl of pottage, the medieval equivalent of a blender accident. It's a sludgy stew that's been simmering longer than your neighbour's questionable life choices, and it hasn't seen a vegetable since the last good harvest. Any excitement will come from the possible mystery meat. Was that a rat's tail? At this point, you're wondering if even those wretched breakfast options aren't leading to an inevitable transformation into more gruel. As you sit down to your morning delicacy, you can't help but notice that the bowl is more of a science experiment than a meal. The aroma wafting up is reminiscent of desperation mixed with an open-air compost heap on a hot day, which is not how modern cuisine typically markets itself. The colour, let's just say it exists in shades you thought only the gods had seen. Dark mahogany with flecks that make you question the root of human ingenuity. Added to this culinary nightmare is the fact it's often served lukewarm, less because of cooking techniques and more as a reminder that time means nothing to a pot that may have started simmering 3 Tuesdays ago. You get a few spoons, maybe even forks if you're lucky, but truly your hands work just as well when it comes to digging in. One wonders if squabbling with siblings over half-formed thoughts like, "Here, you can have this juicy piece," adds flavour. This lack of utensils only amplifies the sense of camaraderie and despair. You simply have to dive in head first. With each spoonful you feel a sense of identity slipping away, gradually morphing into a pottage-loving identity crisis, about as entertaining as a broken stool at a carnival. Mysterious meat bits. Indeed. Guessing what protein is swimming in your bowl is like playing a medieval version of Guess Who, only you know all the options could be floor scraps from last week's feast at the Lord's Castle. Spoiler, it also might be the remnants of yesterday's peasant stew. Chewing. An exhilarating experience akin to gnawing on wet burlap. Every fibre, every texture a subtle reminder that flavour was a rich man's folly. And if you're wondering, no, nobody washed their hands before serving breakfast, and those hands have been outside all day picking at their fields or comforting their goats. Robust flavour, anyone? Let's not forget the prized side dish. The stale bread that has been baked in the fire once a fortnight and stored under a goat's belly for flavour compliance. Slicing it is more a negotiation with fate than technique. It's hard enough to convince it to yield this far into its extinction. You practically need a medieval hatchet and a good wish to carve a slice. Instead of adorning your bowl, it acts as a lifeline, something to soak up that dubious liquid, transforming it from a matinee horror scene to a solid block of regret firmly situated within you. As you come close to finishing your meal, a glance around reveals everyone wearing similar expressions of resigned acceptance. Mouths half full, eyes glazed over in existential crisis, all grasping the swirling mystery of what you're really eating. Who needs insults when everyone collectively contemplates their fate while pushing around the remains of supper? At least the rats have no issues finding something delectable. They thrive where dignity meets despair, and after breakfast the aftermath awaits. With your stomach feeling like an abandoned castle courtyard after a siege, it's time for the day ahead. A day filled with toil and strife, where your only reward is surviving to eat another bowl tomorrow. You seriously wonder how many bowls before you get a proper serving, one that doesn't resemble the bottom of a medieval apothecary's bucket. As you step outside, that potential for a full-blown gruel revolution looms large, as if your very existence is being questioned with every spoonful. One can only hope that life has a better surprise in store later today, or at the very least, maybe tomorrow's bowl will feature, what, more gruel? Ah, joys of existence in the Middle Ages. After your morning feast of despair, it's time to get dressed. But don't even think about high fashion. Your wardrobe consists of a single wool tunic that's more worn and torn than vintage chic. It smells as fresh as yesterday's goat dinner, and the only accessory you have is the comforting feeling of every insect known to man burrowing into your seams. Every dapple of lint and hole reveals the true nature of medieval fashion. Warmth is in vogue, while cleanliness is merely a rumour. As you pull on your tunic, the coarse fibres scrape against your skin like a horde of angry bees having a particularly feisty day. You might be thinking, at least it's warm. But let me remind you that warmth in the Middle Ages often came with a side of itch that could only be relieved by a ritual that involved scratching and rubbing against anything that resembles a tree bark. So, congratulations. You've successfully dressed yourself in the fashionable equivalent of a medieval potato sack, minus the charm. Let's take a moment to appreciate your fellow medieval fashionistas. You've got the peasants rocking their one tunic like it's the latest runway hit, complete with burlap bag shoes, if they're feeling fancy. Meanwhile, the nobles prance around in overly elaborate gowns. Think layers upon layers of fabric from lavishly exaggerated sleeves to trailing skirts that would have anyone tripping over their own toes in a ballroom. But guess what? Look closer. The noble fancier is also sporting an unwashed streak across the back, because washing involved hauling water from the creek, a luxury reserved for the very rich or, the cart-pushing peasants too tired to do laundry while simultaneously trying to survive. Now, let's discuss accessories, if you dare. Hair is to be worn either unkempt or wrapped in a scarf, which doubles as a dust filter because who needs a personal assistant when your fabric can do the job of filtering dirt while it's tucked neatly in your hair? If you're lucky, you might come across a comb, perhaps found beneath a pile of hay or, in true medieval fashion, knowingly stolen from a rabid raccoon. Shoes. Oh, shoes. The medieval world really missed an opportunity for sneaker culture. Instead, you've got leather straps wrapped around your feet that offer barely any comfort or support. If they're particularly old, they've probably morphed into DIY sandals, with half of the sole missing, making every step an unexpected adventure. It's almost like they were specifically engineered to pull you into an athlete's heel-dragging fiasco at every turn. The bigger concern, you might just be participating in the latest growth trend in foot fungus, and we know that's the real medieval fashion statement. And as you step outside in your itchy, musty glory, remember this is just part of being medieval. As you stroll through the village square armed with your worm-infested attire, you'll realise so do your neighbours. The communal aspect of discomfort is vital. You all share in surviving. Somehow that seems to make it easier, right? Peasants walk around in their rumpled rags, reeking of earth and sweat as they breathe the aromatic perfume of their pigsty, located directly next door. As you navigate this vibrant marketplace, the textures, the smells, and let's be honest, that unshakable feeling of grossness, you can either admire or curse each superficial fabric choice. Lucky for you, society isn't judging your looks. You're judged by how efficiently you sow the fields or churn the butter. Nothing like finding solace in the fact that your tunic makes you one of the most credible peasants around, while a noble frittering away their wealth is still drowning in their own layers of extravagant futility. And here's a fun thought to help you wrap your medieval spirit around that wardrobe malfunction. While your fashion faux pas may lean more toward lost at sea than runway ready, at least you have the camaraderie of all other fashion victims to lift your spirits. Every poke from a haystack or a scratch from straw reminds you that the tag comfort didn't exist back then. Just the fashion sense of survive the day, or at least try not to look too repulsive doing it. So take a deep breath. Adventure awaits as you don your tattered garments and prepare for yet another day of unpredictably fabulous medieval life. Now that you've squeezed yourself into your last remains of dignity, it's time to head outside and work, of course. Picture this: 12-hour days of labour that make manual labour feel like a spa day. Whether you're tilling fields or fetching water from a well that's barely trustworthy, every task has a romantic twist, as in romanticizing grueling labour. If you're lucky, you catch a glimpse of sunshine. If not, it's a cloudy day with an even cloudier future. Welcome to the endless grind, where you're working harder than the original draft of a history book, and for way less pay, read nothing. As you step outside, your trusty wool tunic clings to you in a way that's less fashionable and more, I hope this isn't permanent, while your bare feet fill one with the gravelly terrain. Here, in the great outdoors, your morning tasks await. A work plan so meticulous it would make modern project managers weep with envy, or cringe at the lack of health and safety regulations. The day begins with the sun barely creeping over the horizon, as if it too dreads the hours ahead. First up, fetching water from the local well. Easy enough, right? Wrong. That well's more popular than a gossiping neighbour, and by the time you get there, you'll find you're just one member in a queue longer than an IKEA return line. As you wait, quietly praying this well isn't yet another pit of microbial doom, the water seems to glare back at you, almost like it's sifting through its options and deciding you might need a good bout of dysentery to spice up the day. Once you've retrieved your water, assuming you haven't lost any limbs during the chaos, it's time to tackle the fields. You trudge along behind a rickety wooden plough, pulled by a stubborn, bewildered ox that seems far more committed to grazing than working. Ever had to convince your Wi-Fi router to work? It's kind of like that, but with extra grunting and the potential for mud-related disasters. With every push of the plough, the soil appears to laugh at your efforts, taunting you with its stubbornness. Ha! Good luck getting through this. As you weed through the earth, do you take a moment to appreciate the beauty of nature surrounding you? Of course not. You're too busy inhaling the aromatic blend of soil, sweat, and the lingering fragrance of despair. It's as if Mother Nature decided to concoct a luxurious perfume. Eau de hard labour. Imagine selling that at Sephora. The rest of the day involves a delightful medley of tasks, planting crops that will either flourish with some miracle of fate or wither away faster than your social life. If you're lucky and not struck down by misfortune, there might be a few beets left to harvest. But let's be real, those beats will probably end up on the wrong end of your lord's sumptuous banquet table. Each hour that drags by feels like an eternity, and as the sun begins to set, your body feels like it's been run over by a herd of wild boars. You collapse in the dirt, ready to be taken by the ground itself rather than face another moment of labour. But there's no time for that. The day's not over. Oh no, dear friend. There are still chickens to feed, wood to chop, and that mouldy bread to keep your pride desperately clinging to life. Ah, dinner. The one meal you look forward to, knowing it could be your last if that strange brownish stew decides to make a statement. As you pour your food into a worn wooden bowl, you can't help but wonder, is that rat tail in there a sign of good luck, or just your luck playing another cruel joke? One thing's for sure, modern chefs would simply not understand your exceptional culinary finesse. Finally, collapsed in your cosy excuse for a home, you can reflect on your day. Sure, you just spent hours in back-breaking labour, and yes, you probably have more cuts and scrapes than a medieval battle scene, but at least you're alive, right? Welcome to the beauty of medieval life, where every day is an endurance test dressed up like hard work, and the only real rewards are fleeting moments of triumph over dirt and despair. The cheers of imaginary spectators may never arrive, but alas, the sound of laughter, yours, may very well just be a desperate way to cope with the never-ending grind of existence. And thus, with every drop of sweat and every sore muscle, you gather what little motivation you have left. Remind yourself that this is merely a chapter, and brace for another day of the medieval grind. Now that you've toiled away half the morning, let's talk about oral hygiene, or rather, the complete lack of it. You likely have more rodents in your mouth than actual teeth. Forget toothbrushes, you might brush with a twig if you're feeling fancy. Your best bet for breath freshening is garlic, leading to some very interesting social situations. Spoiler, kissing, not happening. Best keep your lips sealed, and maybe start a club for those who also think flossing involves straw after a meal. Welcome to a world where dental care consists of drama, desperation, and the constant risk of tooth-related fatalities. The only ones who might find humour in your dismal dental situation are your fellow peasants, who are busy wondering if they can swap out spare teeth like trading cards at the local market. Sadly, no one's offering to be your dentist either, because in the medieval world, dental practitioners are often combined with barber surgeons, meaning they'll take care of your toothache and your unfortunate mullet in one fell swoop. And speaking of that toothache, you can bet it'll be with you for a long while. The average medieval diet is essentially a brewing ground for dental disaster. You're chewing on gritty bread mixed with whatever crumbs you can find, possibly ground containing flour and a splash of sawdust. You'll notice your existing teeth starting to resemble a rejected set piece from a horror movie long before they eventually succumb to the wrath of decay. It's like playing a game of musical chairs, except the only music sounds like the grinding of your remaining molars against ancient grains that stubbornly refuse to be digested. As for remedies, you might hear about some herbal concoction or secret curative involving more questionable ingredients than a witch's cauldron. They say crushed pearl could improve your smile, when in reality, you're just left with a mouthful of broken dreams and regrettable choices. On particularly grim days, your dental woes become your trusty company, prompting you to start answering questions with, "What's that? Oh, pardon my breath. I'm busy holding on to my last few molars for dear life." Going out becomes a chore as you assess your ability to smile without sending anyone running for the hills. You can hardly fathom the social implications zipping through your mind. It's easy to understand why toothlessness might not earn you a seat at the table during banquets. You better hope the Lord's banquet hall serves up pottage for dinner, full of consistency that makes chewing feel like a team effort. You lift a hunk of that hardtack bread as a substitute weapon, attempting to size up which of your teeth might serve better as a dessert for the birds. And let's address romance, because at some point you might consider seeking companionship. The age-old tradition of medieval courtship, where first dates involve the glaring reality of what's waiting behind those lips. After a single date, you can hear it now. Friend, I do enjoy your company, but your breath could ward off bears. Keep it in the mouth until you're all patched up. The romantic prospects indeed dwindle faster than you can say cavities when you consider the underlying aroma emanating from your poor, neglected teeth. It's so bad that imagining yourself lip-locked, exchanging sweet nothings, quickly turns into a hilarious horror story. And should the noble suitor lean in for that first kiss, you might find yourself dodging attempts left and right, shouting "stand back" like a madman as you realise your dental fate has rendered you the court clown. You outright decline, lest they mistake it for an invitation to the jester's tournament. Spoiler alert, their teeth are just as fragile. The realisation then strikes hard. You're stuck in a cycle of medieval dental despair, feeling more like a punchline than a partner when it comes to societal norms, courting rituals, and even the hopes for epic battles of allure. At this rate, your destiny hinges on finding an experimental herbalist who might combine guesswork with a dash of magic in hopes of salvaging what's left of your toothy charms. So, if you ever find yourself in a moment of introspection, remember, your mouth might be filled with the remnants of gruel and regret, but at least you're fully aware of your unfortunate fate and hilariously clumsy circumstances. Thus, you meander through your day with half a smile, a heart full of hope, and a repertoire of classic medieval dental horror stories at the ready. Cheers to that toothy grin struggling valiantly against a tide of questionable choices. Let the world see you as you are, an absolute laugh with a heart and teeth meant for survival, even amidst the challenges of your medieval existence. Once your mouth stops resembling a medieval compost heap, you might think your body would pay you back for all that hard work by being robust. Surprise! Not quite. Here's where every seasonal illness becomes your new best friend. The local doctor is essentially a medieval magician, and the remedies, a mix of questionable herbs, prayer, and maybe even the odd rat. Minor cuts become deadly fevers because really, who needs antibiotics when you have the joyful chaos of medieval medicine? Picture this. You've just finished a hard day of toil, your back screaming louder than a bard's dramatic rendition of your life story. You feel a tickle in your throat, maybe a slight cough. You think, probably just a bit of dust after working with that ancient shovel that could give a cancerous toe a run for its money. But no, this is 1302. This could be the beginning of your mortal coil unravelling. Welcome to medieval health, a slippery slope where you may end up with, say, a cold. Bad news for you. A simple sneeze might send you spiralling into the clutches of a lingering cough, or, worst of all, a fatal case of the flux. Doctors prescribe solutions that range from calf bile to ointments that smell like something best suited for a severely confused goat. You'll receive such sage advice as rub chicken fat on it, or take these leeches and pray, they probably won't kill you. Spoiler alert, you'll trust nothing and no one. And let's talk about the charming concept of seasonal illnesses. Winter rolls in, and what used to be the delightful anticipation of chilly weather becomes a festival of influenza. Have you ever tried to battle a fever while bundled in wet wool as frigid winds wrap around your half-rotted hovel? It feels like attempting to fight a bear armed only with a spoon while reciting sonnets about warmer days. During summer, you switch from chills to sweat-soaked bedlam. You overexert yourself battling the relentless sun, and its recently awakened mosquito army, only to wake up with the lovely addition of a parasite that's become a dinner guest in your bloodstream. You could call it your cohabitant, and if nature doesn't get you, despair surely will. If these local illnesses don't lay you low, gossip about your slow demise will. Everyone remembers how you coughed last autumn. We all counted the days till you succumbed, didn't we? But fear not. When the doctor visits, it's much akin to a visit to a magician who can't quite find his rabbit, so he just shows you something crusty instead. Want to know what he thinks the root of your problem is? Well, it's either a sickness of the humours or a demon possessing your limbs. Toss in some healing herbs that were likely plucked from a swamp and oh look, you're now cured, or at least a little lighter in your pocket. What a charming bargain. Anticing the woes of medieval life, you might stumble upon folk remedies that become the unofficial #1 bestseller of the night. Swallow a live frog and chant your misfortunes into the well, they may say. This might come straight from your dim-witted neighbour, or worse, your mother-in-law, who claims her remedy worked on her third cousin's beret after scaring off an invasive hedgehog. And what is that quaking sound? Could it be the feeble house cat reshuffling itself into your bed, coated in whispers of medical ignorance? When that cat behaves more like a mystic than any doctor, it's time to re-evaluate your life choices. Perhaps illness becomes your second career, and your bed transforms into a throne of despair where you'll rule over your cats, flapping pillows with fevered dreams of not having to pee outside anymore. So, as your body straggles through the seasons, you'll endure through the various deadly quirks and charms of medieval healing, while remaining ever so grateful for the sweet relief of not instantly slipping into the arms of a chilly grave. Here's to seasonal illness, which, albeit sometimes dreadful, tends to herald the whimsical charm of medieval survival, where every cough might just be heralding calls to the hasty funeral you decidedly have no wish to attend. With the hunt for the next meal underway, let's dive into the cutting-edge realm of medieval culinary adventures. Meatballs? More like meat, what is this even? Because with preservation methods that would alarm even H.G. Wells, what survives the week, or, worse, the month, could end up on your plate. You'll have a feast only if your lord decides that hunting is indeed a priority that day. And oh, season it liberally with salt, unless you want a flavour experience that screams run for your life. So imagine you've gotten the call to the butcher's block. First item on the agenda. It's time to figure out who's been wronged. You might think hunting down a wabbit for dinner sounds like wholesome fun. However, that rabbit has probably spent several months dodging traps while working on its cardio. Yes, society expects you to chase down your meal while simultaneously not stepping in a heap of something you accidentally dropped on the way to the fields. Talk about multitasking. Thus begins the grueling sport of who can hunt a capable dinner without losing a limb. But meat isn't always as easy to come by. If your luck is like most peasants, hint, it's not, you'll be stuck sustaining yourself off a hodgepodge of edible weeds and, let's be honest, the last scraps of beef that didn't quite make the jump into a barren stew. If you're lucky, you'll find some delicacies such as turnips, which are basically nature's way of telling you that it hates your taste buds. Pottage remains your primary dish, more of an experience than a meal, like enduring the long lines at the DMV, but with fewer people, more tears, and a dash of questionable meat. When you finally score some meat, congratulations, you enter the grand culinary world of medieval meal prep. You'd think that a lifestyle so grim would lead to some simple recipes. Spoilers, that would be too easy. Instead, medieval chefs are like avant-garde artists. All flash, no talent. Prepared with the finesse of a blindfolded jester, meat might find itself tossed into an iron pot to simmer with. Well, anything remotely edible found within a multiple kilometre radius. The secret ingredient? Desperation. Now let's talk about dinnerware. You don't just pull out beautiful china like you live in the Hall of Mirrors. Nope. Your utensils consist of rough-hewn wooden bowls that have seen better centuries. Imagine a feast for your senses as you attempt to navigate this landscape of flavours without the benefit of modern hygiene practices. Trying to eat is like battling for a free seat in a crowded subway car. You might end up fighting for your survival before you even get to chew. Now, if you're one of the lucky few who happens to have a little coin to spare, you might enter the realm of high society. But don't let those medieval feasts fool you. Think sumptuous spreads, complete with roasted meats and assorted fruits, all artfully displayed. But here's the kicker. Those meats might be just as dubious as your average peasant stew. The grand banquet may have been contaminated with all sorts of communicable diseases from the preparations because, let's be real, who had time to wash their hands when people were dying left and right from the flu? When it comes time for the feast, guests are expected to gather in a giant hall with long trestle tables laden with stale bread and suspiciously chewy meats. Conversation flows as freely as the uneaten scraps left behind. Just remember, grimaces are the new smiling at the dinner table. You might have to make polite conversation with Sir Gutsy Maguire, who decided that the best part of the deer he hunted was the kidneys, giving you that lovely thought to cling on to for the rest of the evening. Your noble host might tell tales of grandeur and heroics, while you internally plot your escape from the overzealous garlic breath, sipping your ale a little too close for comfort. After dinner, the clean-up. Well, let's say it's done the way only medieval folks know how. Poorly. Everything is discarded while good manners and common sense go out the window, creating a post-feast battlefield that would make even the bravest knights quiver. As for your title in this whole arrangement, you are now the proud bearer of the title, Master of Inedible Leftovers. But when all is said and done, as the bonfires die down and laughter fades into the night, one thing remains. You have survived another day in the adventures of medieval culinary chaos. With an empty stomach and an even emptier spirit, you gaze at the stars while mentally preparing for tomorrow's feast. A culinary catastrophe of epic proportions just waiting to happen. Because in this era, whether you hailed from the impressive heights of nobility or were merely scraping by on the crumbs of history, one truth remained ever consistent. Every meal was a challenge worth facing, if only for the sweet taste of survival. Wet, cold, hot, sweaty. Welcome to the unpredictable weather rollercoaster of your medieval existence. Big surprise. No one accounted for climate control in the Dark Ages. In winter, your hut is more like an icebox, and during summer, it transforms into a sauna where even the bugs take refuge in your bed. Buy a Hillary Clinton poster for summer sunblock. Nope, just a fresh lice infestation. Thank you, Mother Nature. As winter slinks into your life like a cold-hearted relative who stays for too long, your living situation feels like an igloo, only significantly less glamorous. The stone walls of your one-room dwelling are as drafty as a sieve, and probably smell worse than the last 2 days' contents of your chamber pot. You wrap yourself in layers of damp wool that weigh more than your average goat. Not exactly the cosy cascading blankets of your dreams. Your feet, those poor things, barely escape the chill. They huddle together like frightened mice, crammed into shoes that feel like they've been lovingly crafted from the saddest cow in the pasture. And speak of moisture, when it snows in style. The kind that freezes your resilience and sculpts icicles that could rival some of the sharpest weapons in the armory. How charming! After a night of restless sleep punctuated by the rustling of hay and the relentless nips from frost-covered feathers, your mornings greet you with a frosted surprise upon awakening. you successfully manage to throw off your wool blankets without shivering into a state of hypothermia, just in time to witness the sun decide if it would like to shine today, or simply remain hidden behind the clouds like your summer plans after finding out they weren't coupon eligible. Now, fast forward to summer, when every wall within your abode insists on playing a game of how hot can we make it. It's like living in a bread oven designed solely for the convenience of whichever bugs decided to make themselves home. Sweat pools in places you can't even mention without blushing, and you suddenly find yourself wishing for a good old-fashioned frost to sweep through and save you from the heatwave of purgatory. Food. Forget the luxury of fresh salads or cool drinks. The only refreshing flavour you can conjure up comes from the warm feeling of stale beer sliding down your throat, because really, it's either that or risk the booby-trapped threat of water that's more likely to send you sprinting to the privy than quench your thirst. And speaking of privies, summer is peak bug season. You'll face a constant battle of swatting mosquitoes, dodging flies, and waving your arms like a mad person trying to ward off unwanted pestilence. Your body becomes a battlefield, with skin covered in itchy welts from what must be the combined population of all flying insects in Europe. Once you've mastered how to survive in the boiling heat, storms arrive to test your mettle. Nature does not relent. Clouds gather and, suddenly what could have been a pleasant afternoon turns into a catastrophic deluge threatening to turn your hapless home into a soggy death trap. As the rain pours down in sheets, water seeps through slits in the roof, as if it holds a personal grudge against your misery. You might try to manoeuvre your straw bed to a less waterlogged area, but let's be honest, you've just accepted that your life is now a perpetual cycle of mud and drowning domesticity. On top of everything else, storms bring winds powerful enough to make any sane person pray to whatever deity has spared them thus far. Odds are, if a particularly nasty gust catches your roof just right, you'd wake up in the middle of a horrific storm in somebody else's backyard, a place where you could easily find yourself next to a bewildered family of peasants who haven't witnessed a commotion like this since the last witch trial. As the seasons cycle on, you think you've gotten used to this. Yet here you are, caught in a weather system that's just as unpredictable as the rumours bouncing between markets, soothing possibilities of warmth, as elusive as a noble's kindness. But amid all this, you can take comfort in one thing. If you could control the weather, you'd have better luck than trying to sweeten your deal in the court of Lord Kafka. So, you tighten your tunic and prepare for whatever Mother Nature decides to throw your way, humour lingering like the aroma of yesterday's pottage. Need a drink? Think again. The nearby stream looks refreshing, but spoilers, it's a microbial swimming pool. Your best choice is low-alcohol beer, safe enough for consumption and often the drink of choice for children. Cheers to thinly veiled survival instincts, but there's no refreshing splash to wash away the taste of last night's pottage. You gaze at that murky stream and wonder if it could be any worse than your grandmother's cabbage soup. Spoiler, it can. Worse yet, you might need to walk half a day just to find a well that doesn't double as a watering hole for the local livestock. And by livestock, we mean that adorable pig snuffling its way through yesterday's refuse. But let's not get too comfortable. For the peasants of medieval Europe, the concept of clean drinking water is about as solid as your last vintage wool tunic. As you contemplate your life choices, you should have thought twice about that extra helping of porridge last night. You notice your friends shy away from the stream, eyes wide with the wisdom of experience. "You don't want to drink there," they say, pointing at a dead pigeon bobbing in the current. That's where Farmer Herg's cow just had an existential crisis. You nod sagely, as if you actually understand what that means. But you do decide to venture further into the fields, where you encounter a well that has seen better days, The kind of well that practically shouts foul play with every creak of its rotting wood. As you lower the bucket with all the grace of a concrete block, you think about water quality, an ancient peasant's wildest dream. If hygiene rules were a thing in this time, you'd practically be running for Knight of the Realm, the kind who saves damsels and clean drinking water alike. The water finally arrives, with a gurgle that sounds suspiciously like a creature in pain. You sip tentatively, bracing for the worst. Instead, you get nothing but a sharp pang of regret and a gentle patter of regret on your conscience. As you spit the water back out onto your dusty feet, you can't help but feel a peculiar camaraderie with the rats, who are likely thriving on the same organic chemistry experiment you just rejected. But worry not. Life goes on in medieval Europe, and as you clutch your belly and gag softly at the thought of that sickly sweet ale, you hear a commotion in the distance. It could only be one thing. The local alehouse is open for business. Hallelujah! Let's talk about medieval ale, the rebel beverage. On your way, you're fortunate to observe the art of brewing, which has been honed to perfection from centuries of experimenting, which is a fancy way of saying, we have a lot of time on our hands, and whatever we can scrub off the ground will work. Did someone say barley? How quaint. There's so much science happening behind those sticky, smelly walls that you feel compelled to take a note or two, but the smell is too pungent. It's like getting slapped in the face with a loaf of yeast left out too long. When you finally arrive at the alehouse, the atmosphere is raucous. Picture musicians strumming away on instruments that are half rotted, and performers adorned in outfits that haven't been washed since last Harvest Fest. Alongside you, peasants young and old are downing their pints of weak ale like they're swinging a sword in battle. It's a fascinating sight to behold, like a primordial wave of understanding. Maybe this is what Don Quixote felt like when he and his knights charged a windmill. Now, you sit in the corner with a pint of whatever they've cooked up, contemplating your options. Should you join in on an epic tale of your last cleaning escapade, or how you bravely battled against a stubborn goat? But you know what? Let's skip that and enjoy the sweet relief of being surrounded by your fellow, less than hygienic humans, clinking their mugs and laughing over last week's disastrous harvest. Who needs clean water when you can be slightly buzzed and slightly less miserable? So, as you gulp that beautiful mixture of fermentation and feigned happiness, raise your mug high in solidarity. Cheers to all that fine medieval living. The only thing more terrible than quenching your thirst with questionable water is doing it without friends, or with the wrong tavern companions. Drink up, lovely peasant. Because in many ways, this low-alcohol brew is going to be as good as it gets, and tomorrow will be another perilous day in your medieval life. Feeling fresh? Time to sink the idea of bathing into the realm of myth. You're not just dirty, you're practically a walking art installation crafted from the accumulation of filth. Bathing could open your pores and invite disease, so the accepted practice of self-care relies heavily on the ancient wise theory of just don't touch it. Would it surprise you to know communal baths had more scandals than an episode of a reality TV show? Yes, let's dive into the murky waters of hygiene, which in medieval times was as glamorous as a mud pit during a rainstorm. First off, let's clarify what the average person in the medieval world considered clean. The bar wasn't low, it nearly scraped the ground. People believed that washing could wash away not just dirt, but also your soul's protective layer, essentially giving germs a free pass to invade. So, if you were a peasant or even a lowly lord, you'd likely stick to a regimen of avoidance and avoidance alone. Your body was like a fine-aged cheese, and while that might sound charming, the reality was more akin to a pungent brie left out in the sun. Now, you might think, surely there's an exception for upper-class nobles who can afford soap. Wrong. While they had access to the occasional herbal wash or scented oil, the noble elite held their own beliefs about staying unwashed. You see, their wealth came with a different set of problems. Too much gold meant not enough health, especially when indulging in the finest of medieval feasts. After all, nothing says I'm important quite like rolling into a banquet with a beautifully unkempt mane, not to mention a layer of unknown grime to boot. Bathing almost felt like a slap in the face to their noble status. Like every time they covered themselves in water, they were washing away social superiority along with the dirt. Let's be honest, if ever there was a beauty standard in the medieval times, it was grunge chic. The dirtier, the better. People would regularly adorn themselves with layers of unwashed clothing, which expertly presented a lovely aroma described best as a multi-layered effect of sweat, animal residue, and the faint whiff of long-gone meals. Community bonding often came with a bonus. Shared compliments about how solidly each other's bodies resisted the trials of cleanliness. Good to see you're still alive, Fred, still managing to keep the pig style. The closest thing resembling a communal bath was either a public basin filled with questionable water or a river, which, spoiler alert, was typically downstream of your neighbour's toilet practices. At the communal lavoir, where laundry was washed, toil not just meant dirtying your hands, but also likely taking a quick dip in a local bacterial carnival. You could easily stumble upon a small gathering of gossiping townsfolk, chatting away, while dodging the floating debris of what could only be described as medieval surprise. Want to join in? Just hop into the delightful cesspool of half-rotted vegetables, dirty socks, and who knows what else. A refreshing dip is certainly the better choice. And what about the finer approach to body care, you ask? Perhaps you've heard of beauty rituals. They were few and far between, dominated by the idea that herbs mixed with last week's potpourri would keep you smelling somewhat fresh. Think chamomile and death, floral scents mingling awkwardly with your naturally petrified odour, became an unexpected aroma that captured noble refinement. Forget essential oils from distant lands. If you were lucky, you got to drown in the extracted goodness from some random weed you chewed on, while contemplating your life choices. If you were a woman, let's not forget the added dimension of having to maintain a facade of cleanliness amongst social scrutiny that wanted you to shine like a diamond, even if you resembled something more akin to an unkempt scarecrow. The societal expectation was to maintain a perfect appearance in spite of your iron vat of discomfort, which usually meant layering on fragrant herbs and trying not to breathe too deeply during marriage arrangements. So, as the day winds down and the smell of the evening air merges with the scent of your unwashed glory, remember this. In medieval times, being clean was merely an act of bravery and not a measure of virtue. With all this delightful grotesquerie, it's no wonder you might find yourself dreaming of tomorrow's struggles of dirt, despair, and the notable lack of deodorant. Yet somehow bound to wake up in the same space where cleanliness is a luxury few can afford. Because in the world of medieval hygiene, if you were lucky enough to spot a bar of soap, it was probably a rock disguised incredibly well. Bon voyage. As your day continues, let's discuss church and state, the original power couple. The church controls everything, from your daydreams to what you eat. Miss a prayer? That's sinning with capital implications. It's not a mere belief. It's a full-on lifestyle that practically locks you in a spiritual cage, while the priest holds the keys. Good luck getting a better deal after missing Sunday service. It's like living under a regime where your freedom of expression is replaced by a very real fear of eternal damnation. If you thought the HOA was strict about your lawn decor, try living in a system where your very soul is on the line for, say, forgetting to bow 3 times during matins. The church dictates your moral compass. elevating the most mundane of activities to the realm of the sacred. Meals are planned around fasting days, leaving you to stare longingly at that delectable roasted chicken your neighbour boasts of while you gnaw on your stale bread. Forget about reasonable seasonings too. No garlic before church, lest the congregation thinks you've been consorting with the devil or simply harbouring a less than desirable odour. And heaven forbid you mix meat and dairy on a feast day. The clergy would pounce on that blasphemy faster than a cat on a mouse. Oh, and speaking of feast days, those are the holy days that often feel like promises unfulfilled. Sure, the church lifts the fasting restrictions for a day or two, letting you indulge in that life-sustaining meat you haven't tasted since last month's feast. If you're wealthy enough, that is. For the average peasant, treating yourself to a roast during a festival is about as common as winning the lottery. It's a tantalising taste of joy amid the constant grim of existence, but enjoy it while you can. Come Monday, you're back to the grind, and no one is hosting a charity ball for you when Friday's fast rolls around again. And let's not forget the church's role as your emotional therapist, spiritual guide, and community organiser, all rolled into one. In fact, if you find yourself troubled by that persistent rash from the last poorly prepared pottage, don't expect sympathy from friends. Have you prayed about it? Is the common retort. Your fungal rebellion might be rectified through vigorous prayer, not, as one might hope, by simply cleaning up your diet and scrubbing your skin with soap. Speaking of which, how many prayers does it take to cure scabies? Honestly, nobody knows. It's all just part of the grand medieval experiment. Miss a mass or skip confessions and congratulations. You're the latest gossip around the village market, widely regarded as an outcast or, worse still, a potential witch or heretic. If you've ever felt the pain of a harsh glare from nosy neighbours peering out from behind their curtains, you can channel that energy into your daily prayer. The longer you fear judgment, the more reverent you become, which is exactly the church's business strategy. It's a bit of a spiritual Ponzi scheme, if you will. But wait, there's more. As if daily life under the church's watchful eye wasn't tough enough, let's dive into the world of penance. If you've sinned, and believe me, you inevitably have, you must atone. How? That's where your local priest's creativity comes in handy. Bad thoughts? Say 5 Hail Marys and give the altar a good scrubbing. Cheated at cards, 3 Our Fathers, an offering of bread to the altar, and perhaps a vow to stop playing cards. Good luck. It's like a medieval version of placing a bet that you can't possibly win. And if you find yourself hungry after all this worship and guilt, don't fret. Just realise you can visit the local church for free, but don't expect meals. It's more about soaking up the ambience of judgment. So, as the day winds down, you realise that your life hasn't really belonged to you since the moment you were baptised, more like a lease you can't renew. The priests wield their positions like lords of the manor, and from the pulpit every mistake is a ticket to damnation. Is it any wonder that the medieval folks were simultaneously terrified of God's wrath, but still managed to find pride in the simple joys of their chaotic lives? That communal bonfire you joined last summer still sparks joy, more so than the harsh lectures on sin. In closing this segment, let's remember that navigating this maze of religion and survival isn't just about piety. It's also about doing your best to not be the unfortunate soul brought up in a sermon as the latest example of what not to do. So raise your cup of watered-down ale. It's technically holy, and let's toast to another day of resilience among the never-ending trials of church, state, and the soft tyranny of living with an ever-watchful eye. Drink hearty, for tomorrow awaits, with its own set of sermons, obligations, and probably a bit of cold pottage. Cheers! You think your life is hard? Now imagine layering in the entire weight of medieval patriarchy. For women, it's like playing a video game on impossible mode, without health kits, side quests or unlockable features. You're being married off. Congratulations. Better start producing heirs in a backyard full of societal expectations and unrealistic standards. It's not just about finding the right dress. You're also stuck figuring out what to wear in a world that expects you to be as silent as a tomb in the middle of a gene pool. Picture this. You're only valued for your ability to bear children and keep the household running, roughly equivalent to maintaining an unfiled stack of medieval texts that nobody really wants to read. Your daily tasks include cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, and fending off that ever-present cloud of doom known as infertility. Education. Forget it. If you're lucky enough to be born into a noble family, you might learn a thing or two about how to keep your husband happy, or at least keep him from plotting your demise. But for the majority of women, the only curriculum is lessons in homemaking, and how to avoid the neighbour's cat, because who knows what sort of curse it could cast upon your untidy abode. And if you dare to question your fate, well, that's bound to raise eyebrows. Prepare yourself for village gossip that'll feel like a medieval horror story you'd rather not be a part of. Think of it as Twitter in the 14th century. Everyone knows everyone's business, and you'll end up a subject in debates around the communal well. Now, let's talk about childbirth. Hold on to your skirts, because this is where the plot twists harder than a knight's defence against a dragon. Giving birth isn't just a stroll in the park, it's more like trying to take a casual jog through the local thorn bush. With no epidurals, sterilisation or modern medicine, women regularly face the Grim Reaper head-on, while simultaneously trying to overcome the challenge that is the lack of proper hygiene. Imagine a room filled with yelling, more prominent than any medieval tavern, as you're cheered on by a crew of witches, midwives, who cluck over you as you navigate the most life-threatening version of guess what. Lovely fun, huh? And God forbid you have complications. A mere fever could mean you're on the road to the afterlife quicker than you can say it's a girl. If you are fortunate enough to survive the grueling act of childbirth and safely deliver a healthy baby, congrats. You may have just completed a level very few women manage to complete without facing a visit from Dr. Not So Helpful. It's no wonder so many women don't just yearn for independence, they practically cling to it, like a margarine jar in a battle for the last biscuit with a hungry child in a rural tavern. Once this entire chaotic process is concluded, guess what? Your life doesn't shift into easy mode with soap opera-style melodrama. It ramps up. Congratulations, you are now a full-time caretaker to your little lord or lady, while still shouldering the responsibilities of household management. If you're lucky enough to be married to a noble or lord, you're expected to flip a magical switch to go from dutiful wife to political pawn at a moment's notice. Want to broker a deal, strengthen family ties, or keep your station in life from crumbling like stale bread? Well, better learn how to smile through it all while trotting out 10 small children dressed in clothes you only just finished sewing. Let's not disregard potential accusations of witchcraft. When you do something as wild as trying to grow herbs or perhaps speak your mind, you could easily be marked as a witch. The irony is almost too thick to slice. Women making medicine can quickly become something much more menacing. Cast spells on the villagers with ginger tea, and suddenly everyone is getting suspicious. If a cow goes dry or the Baron doesn't win that big battle, you might find yourself tied to a stake faster than a knight can saddle his horse. In short, a woman's life in the Middle Ages is a blending pot of pain, societal expectations, and an obstacle course designed by a malevolent game master, where hitting the reset button is simply not an option. To thrive in such a world, you'd need the cunning of a fox, the endurance of a workhorse, and maybe even a potion or two to help you along the way. So next time you're entitled to self-pity over a questionable day, spare a thought for the women navigating this game called life. No health kits in sight, just sheer determination and hope that enough herbs can save the day. Nervous about the lack of stability? Grab a seat because state violence is next. If you think your morning shower is rough, wait until you hear the punishment options for, well, anything. Tumbling into public torture was not only a reality, it was a spectator sport. Just be sure to get on the right side of a noble, or you might end up in their next game of who can take the most fingers off. Welcome to the medieval equivalent of a reality show, obviously before they invented cameras, but just as captivating to the audience, who gathered with glee to watch the once noble suffer in exquisite, painstaking ways. You've got to hand it to them. If nothing else, they excelled at putting the fun in dysfunctional. Imagine your neighbour, who you had a minor squabble over goat space, getting put on display for public punishment. The crowd would gather, bags of popcorn excluded, ready to place bets on how long it would take for your neighbour to spill the beans on their recent moonlit escapades. Or at least provide a gut-wrenching confession that would shock the whole village. Will he confess to sneaking grain from the Lord's storehouse? They'd ponder with glee while gathering in what might be humorously labelled as a festival of grievance. Heads roll, quite literally, at these events, where a poor fellow's bad luck became the entertainment of the century. Now, to clearly outline the menu of medieval torture, if such a thing ever existed, let's talk about some delightful options. First up, the breaking wheel. Sounds too whimsical for a horror show? You'd be wrong. This lovely contraption bestows great joy upon those inclined to inflict misery through a series of smashed limbs and broken bones arranged in a decorative way. Sit back and watch as your victim's arms are wrapped around that wheel, while fun-loving townsfolk zealously cheer them on or discuss the latest gossip they'll spin at the town tavern after the evening's somewhat grim entertainment. Is that a foot tapping, or is the wheel just waiting for its next act? As if that's not enough, there's the classic Iron Maiden. No, not the delicious vegan breakfast. This terrifying design involves a sarcophagus-like contraption lined with blades, ensuring your visitor will never leave as anything but shredded confetti. It's a horrific way to ensure that the peasant population stays in line, but think about the artistry. The town's blacksmith must have had a field day crafting the precise array of spikes and hinges, leading to a creation that could be considered an awful blend of practicality and dark aesthetic. They probably held contests for the most efficient design, complete with a prize of a goat for whoever could craft the most satisfying way to comply with the noble's dirty work. When it comes to executing these flamboyant tortures, let's not forget about humiliation, the real cherry on top. Being the victim of forced public, shaming was as routine as morning prayers. If you weren't being dragged from your hovel to stand in the stocks, you were probably tied to a pole while the community hurled rotten vegetables or worse, the sandwich ingredients from last week's feast. Just imagine the local ladies of the court, dressed in their finest attire, commenting on your unfortunate circumstances as if critiquing the latest fashion trends, instead of witnessing the gruesome reality before them. It's Social Dynamics 101. What better way to rise in a medieval class society than to witness your peer suffer during a showcase of misguided justice? And before theories take flight, it's essential to note that the laws governing punishing offences were as slippery as the ragged surface beneath your peasant feet. You'd be amazed how easily you could land in a world of hurt for crimes as small as, gasp, being late to a prayer meeting, or merely looking too smug while walking past a noble's vineyard. Heaven help the poor soul whose dual crime were to complain about last night's soup, because those offence lists, they were long, and the punishments even longer. Oddly enough, these displays of medieval torture also had an unintentional silver lining, albeit a twisted one. It birthed the legendary discussions on ethics. What is just punishment? Can you put a price on suffering? The town gathered at their little tavern, debating over mugs of watered wine about the morality of it all, while also shaking their heads at the bizarre creativity murderers would unfurl. And when the executioner's axe glinted in the last rays of sunlight, the conversation would shift, not toward outrage, but to the sheer audacity that such horrid methods could even exist. So, as you retreat from tonight's morbid examination of medieval life, you might chuckle at the absurdity of it all. And while you nestle into your warm, torture-free bed, remember, before every cosy comfort of today, there were days when a minor infraction could land you in the stocks, a broken wheel, or worse, with peasants and nobles trading thoughts over the art of torture like it was the latest fashion trend. Cheers to modern times, where your biggest worry might be who's sitting on your couch binge-watching reality shows and swiping left. At this point you'll probably wonder if the day can end on a kinder note. It won't. Dying is an essential aspect, with burials hastily done before your body becomes a public health hazard. Your coffin is less golden opulence and more shallow dirt patch. You might get prayers, but more likely you're tossed in with the last season's vegetables. In fact, if you happen to shuffle off this mortal coil during a busy market day, you could become part of a macabre real estate venture, because anyone without prime burial plot potential is just another flesh mound in the ever-expanding problem of overcrowding. It's a bit like jumping into a fast-moving elevator. Everyone is jostling, but there's no guarantee you'll get off on your intended floor. The concept of death in medieval times is a real adventure in anxiety. No romanticized view of passing away here. It's a chaotic free-for-all, where sombre death knells are often drowned out by the more pressing business of who's taking in the next harvest. Death is the ultimate game of musical chairs, and the only rule is that when the music stops, you're better off without a seat. There aren't funeral homes, just the remains of your neighbour hosted in the same open field where cows congregate. Their lively presence rumbles around the latest gossip while you're shoved into your final resting place. It feels less dignified than a trot to the local tavern. You needn't fear a long, drawn-out goodbye. A medieval funeral is more like a vulgar toast than a solemn service. A few tears may fall, but it's usually accompanied by a hearty meal, as villagers celebrate one last round of ale in honour of the dearly departed. If you're lucky, you might even be treated to a few whispered tales about your life, which are just as likely to be exaggerated as they are to be flattering. And if you didn't quite make the cup of tea before crossing over, well, the village priest becomes your unofficial end-of-life consultant. A wise fellow pokes his head in occasionally to remind you about the afterlife. He's counting on that tithing to score some heavenly reward after all. And yet even he has to attend moderately gruesome burials, so it's not like he's enjoying it. Just remember, as the casket drops, his prayers may half-heartedly entertain the idea that you might be somewhere better, or simply swiftly whisked away into the graveyard's anthropological chaos. A tiny, fleeting glimpse of glory before the earth engulfs you. Let's talk about the actual burial, shall we? Picture it. A ragged crew of your friends and family has gathered half sobbing, half pulling weeds. They scramble around your shallow dirt pit, trying not to trip over their own tears, and possibly your former goat. Someone fumbles the shovel, yelping awkwardly in the process, creating potentially the most disorganised event since the last harvest festival. As they toss dirt onto your box, as they should, it's an unfortunate affair. Not a lot of time is spent reflecting about your splendid moments. Then there's the delightful post-burial dynamic. Because when one person leaves the grim throne of mortality, others usually follow suit. Call it a chain reaction, or a weird medieval game of who's next in line, that reminds the living of their own impending doom. The Grim Reaper's calendar is packed tighter than a peasant's hovel, and there's only so much time left for ducking in and out of the public eye. The living grateful for the feast that follows, raise their flagons, chattering over juicy stories and funny anecdotes about you, blissfully unaware that your spirit might just be hovering around, serving as a permanent ghostly spectator. If only you could interject, "Come on, guys, I'd love a nice tribute, not me caught in a narrative trap about whether I too once slipped in sheep dung." In the grand scheme of medieval life, the unceremonious burial is but a blip in a centuries-old cycle of life and death, where everyone hopes the soil is softer for their final resting place than the crap-filled pits so many have come before. And thus life goes on, with laughter, bad food, and new life peppering the air, until ultimately, in gloomy cyclical predictability, it's someone else's turn to join the merry dance of demise. So, as you mull over the graves that disappear into the earth, know that your contribution won't be long remembered or kimchi-worthy. But it's comforting to think that life continues spinning, even as you become a footnote in the history of bad burial planning. After all, the living still have work to do, namely collecting those last-minute veggies and bugging the priest about your fate on Judgment Day. And surely, you don't mind continuing to haunt a few mortals along the way, do you? Medieval legends might lead you to believe knights were all valiant heroes. In reality, one charge into battle and the shining armour's allure quickly transforms into a butcher shop of chaotic clashing metal, and some unfortunate fates await the noblemen who bit off more chunks than they could chew. Let's dissect that fantasy over a noble pairing of medieval ale and last meal intentionality behind every blade of grass. Picture this: your chivalric knight, bedecked in gleaming armour, galloping into battle thinking he's about to make history. Spoiler alert, history often remembers the ones who get themselves disemboweled, not the gallant acts they hope to perform for their lords. First, let's talk about that shiny armour. Ever try to run a marathon while wearing a metallic burrito? Exactly! A full suit of plate mail weighed about as much as a teenage dragon, making jousting a detailed performance art piece rather than an actual sport. If the crown jewels of the kingdom were at stake, knights are charging in as if gladiators were deciding who had the better head of hair. Slicing and dicing in armour carved from metal becomes as graceful as a cowboy on a mechanical bull. Lots of flailing, minimal success, and a charming likelihood that someone's evening will end badly. Forget mounting horses. Half the time, these chivalric heroes were lucky to get in a good swing, without toppling head over heels into a muddy ditch. But why endure such overwhelming clumsiness, you ask? Ah, the noble cause. It's truly hailed as a time for glory, a chance to earn a cool title, and maybe even an extra hunk of pie at the Lord's banquet. But here's the kicker. Battlefields were basically flea markets of bad decisions. Sure, your knight may have had an impressive lineage, but standing in the muck is where survival instincts go to die, especially when one lance to the face turns valour into a rapid exit from the history books. Let's not forget, accidental injuries were a knight's best friend, more like accident-prone buddies, am I right? Nothing says honour like getting your leg crushed under your own horse while it bolts at the sight of a panicked chicken. Battle? Please? An affront from poultry was often worse than facing a scorned enemy. Ever tried remounting your steed when it's retreating faster than your chances of returning alive? Spoiler alert, someone's likely to end up skewered by their own weapon if they're lucky enough to find their footing. And while knights were out swirling around the fields like stiff-leg mimes, the ladies waiting for their return were probably counting down the seconds till the inevitable disastrous rant about how the earlier skirmish took out half their friends. You'd think there'd be a plethora of heroic tales of bravery. Instead, you're more likely to encounter head-shaking tales of knights running away faster than a bard trying to evade paying taxes, chasing down their pride as they fled the battlefield. Then there's the delightful reality of post-battle wounds, which were, let's say, about as comforting as being treated with leeches. but luckily in the noble circles, the leeches tended to be more stylish. However, nothing beats coming home to an unsuspecting spouse thinking she'd married a gallant knight, only to have him come home grumbling about festering wounds that resemble leftover stew. Romantic, isn't it? And let's dive head first into that medieval hospital, if you can call it that. You know, where charmingly, try-hard, chirpy birds are being treated with potions firmly rooted within the neighbourhood witch's brew, and practitioners argue for or against bloodletting as an appropriate treatment for everything from a bad haircut to a chronic case of feeling overwhelmingly deader than usual. Because pre-anesthesia, well, consider each surgery a new game show. Will you survive, or do we up the ante with a leech-infested elixir? In the back and forth of medieval society, nights were much like vodka at a party. Entertaining, but ultimately questionable. So, as they clanked around in their flashy armour, noble lineage and all, realise this: heroics, hopeful, wishful thinking only run skin deep. Once the initial thrill wears off, remember, being painted as some shining legend of valour certainly doesn't shield someone from the clinical definition of a medieval diet. With every honourable battle came the potential for losing limbs, so while your knight fancies himself the nobility of the world, just know there's nothing heroic about mucking through conflict-laden fields where what they're really losing is the dignity with every clumsy charge. The knight's life was less about gallant heroics, and more about whether he'd make it to breakfast without the need for amputation. So, as you raise your mug of ale to toast the knights of old, just remember that glory's a slippery slope, and those in shining armour may not come out shining at all. By now you're really starting to question your decision to live in the medieval era, because the glitter of royalty is like a mirage. Yes, you can dream of attending lavish banquets, but the reality is nobles are still racked with a haunt of misery. What's their child count look like? Despite having a life that lacks proper comfort, it doesn't keep them off the chopping block when it comes to having honour-treated difficulties. Imagine waking up each day with the constant pressure of not just filling your own castle, but also ensuring it's filled with heirs. Every noblewoman is basically stuck in a never-ending baby-making competition, and that's before we get into the grisly rates of childbirth mortality. Given your odds, where you'd practically need a miracle just to survive the experience, having an upper-class identity sounds less like a fairy tale and more like a horror show. Let's take a look at this fairy tale facade a little closer. Nobles might get to sip elegantly from goblets of fine wine, but little do they know their meals are laden with secrecy. The high-table feasts could very well contain mystery meats that are more likely to come from dubious suppliers than loyal subjects. Ever heard of the phrase, "the fish stinks from the head"? Well, in medieval courts that's certainly true, with nobles serving dishes that were just as risky as hunting for gold just to impress their peers. Meanwhile you, as a humble peasant, can eat the minimal food from your own farm. The only secret ingredient is hard work, and trust me, it's much less risky than the royal menus. And then there's courtly intrigue, an absolute nightmare for anyone in the ruling class. Think of the constant backstabbing, scheming and political plots, where even minor comments can lead to a fate worse than death, a swift execution, or a family feud lasting generations. Imagine living with the knowledge that you have to dine with the very people who might conspire to end your reign over a mere misunderstanding. It's like playing chess, only instead of pawns, you've got your family members being dragged into a deadly game of ambition. Nobility turns every meal into a game of political roulette, while you, as a peasant, can navigate your dinner table without the worry of someone secretly peppering your stew with poison. On top of that, let's chat about fashion. Nobles wear expensive garments made of fine fabrics, but they often feel like they've stepped into an itchy woolen death trap. Sure, it looks nice, but when your corset feels like a medieval torture device that's grabbing at your ribs, and the weight of that fur cloak would crush a small horse, your idea of luxury starts to evaporate quicker than the last remnants of their sanity during a family gathering. Contrast that with your simple wool tunic that offers warmth, without completely immobilizing you from the neck down. Yes, it's probably washed less often than needed, but at least it won't make you feel like you're navigating the catwalk while also auditioning for the role of a human burrito. Of course, let's not forget about social mobility, or rather, the lack thereof. Nobility has their fate dictated at birth, making their lives a series of ceremonial obligations and family expectations. If you think you're trapped in a 9-to-5 job now, think again. The noble class is bound by over-the-top etiquette that would put the most rigid corporation to shame. A peasant may toil in the fields, but at least novel legends swarm around them like flies on a dung heap. You could raise a toast to your fellow labourers post-harvest, none of whom care if you mispronounce daisies or accidentally give the goat a funny name. Meanwhile, the noble is too busy grinding under the weight of inheritance to so much as laugh. After all, humour in the court can get you stricken off the guest list faster than you can say King's Jest. In the grand scheme of things, the daily grind of a peasant comes with its own trials. Limited food, back-breaking labour, and questionable hygiene. But at least you have the freedom of the open fields and, let's be honest, far less soap opera drama to contend with. Sure, the challenges are numerous, but as a noble, you might be living in a castle, but don't be fooled. Your life's about as comfortable as a haunted stone chair in a dreary stone dungeon. Ultimately, you stand a much better chance of surviving medieval life with a good old-fashioned callus from hard work than you do clutching a goblet in a banquet hall filled with peril at every hurried bite. So let's raise a mug of watered-down ale to the sweet, savoury simplicity of peasant life, where at least the drama is served with a side of honest toil and not saved for courtly treachery. Now, where would a stable medieval existence be without the proceedings of the neighbourhood? You and your peasant pals could easily gather round for the latest gossip, unless you fall victim to a meal from the Lord, appearing more like a feast of flaying embarrassment than an amicable pilgrim-friendly group gathering. In fact, the only real social event you can look forward to is a festival, or perhaps a new method of torture introduced by a passing nobleman. The gossip topics swirl faster than the local children playing with mud pies, ranging from who snagged the last rat at the marketplace to which local widow is trying to woo the town blacksmith. Spoiler alert, none of this gossip is ever good news. Picture this: the sun setting over the fields, its golden rays barely illuminating your hovel, while your neighbours coalesce outside, exchanging tales over the dying embers of last week's fires, and finding more joy in describing their injuries than they did acquiring them. You hear Peter the farmer just lamenting about the goat that met its unfortunate demise due to a particularly aggressive chicken, or Greta from down the lane proudly announcing that she has eliminated the lice population in her family. A lost battle, really. But who are you to burst her bubble? It's basically a who can outgross the other contest, and honestly, it's like gathering around for an episode of Survivor Medieval Edition. And then there's Bert, the town's infamous well-digger. If you thought his profession was vague, wait until he starts claiming that he's discovered a fountain of youth that's just a really muddy hole. Thank you, Bert, for your expert insight and strange affinity for wishful thinking. Of course, when it's not neighbourly discourse revolving around theatrically exaggerated stories, you might find yourself caught up in the ongoing drama of one's livestock. Has anyone checked on Lord Harold's prized pig? Yes, the very one that once participated in the village social calendar, now likely dealing with its own existential crisis over a dinner plate. Thirsting for something other than neighbourly drama? Too bad, because considering the social ranking of beasts, your primary connection to the noble realm might be through your local lord's horse, a creature more pampered than you could ever dream of being. You might join in on crowning the noble steed your new best friend, if only for a fleeting moment of companionship before the four-legged creature gallops off to a feast ending in dessert fit for a king. You spend your days cultivating fields with just as much determination as a neighbourly heart, secretly longing for the extravagance of decorations that you will never possess. Back to the intrigue. How about the bickering between the baker and the butcher? Their rivalry is as delicious as the bread and meat they produce. Perhaps you snag a quick glimpse during your early morning errands, where the dialogue goes from "my bread is fluffier than your worst horror story" to "at least my sausages don't squeak when you bite into them." It's perfect comedic gold, and in a world where laughter is fleeting, you cherish these moments like fine wine. Except it's more likely thin ale, because this is medieval Europe. And what about church on a Sunday? Well, that brings out the neighbourly spirit in full bloom too. It's not just an obligation, it's a competitive sport of who can sit through the longest sermon without falling asleep, praying fervently that your neighbour's snoring is louder than the minister's voice. If a sermon flies over the heads of the congregation as gracefully as a sparrow, you'll still find a way to weave that into the great tapestry of gossip by the time the sermon's conclusion approaches. In every aspect, the neighbourhood is essential to your existence, even if it feels like a comedy of errors where everyone is vying for the title of most dramatic life. Whether it's a spectacle of ill-fated matchmaking, or a challenge of wits involving stale bread and rival farms, the camaraderie of your fellow peasants will keep your spirits high, even when the crops are low and life seems bleak. After all, what's worse than having a life filled with trials and tribulations? It's enduring them alone. So let the collective failures and minor victories of your neighbourhood weave a thread of resilience and laughter together. In the end, life might not be a fairy tale in your part of the world, but at least you know everyone else is in it with you, suffering, laughing, and gossiping right alongside, creating a tapestry more vibrant than a knight's shiny plate armour. The struggles might be real, but so is your community, keeping the drudgery at bay, one laugh-filled gathering at a time. On the battlefield of love, romance was less roses and more bluffing queen and jester. Noble unions often meant some nasty business behind closed doors. When fealty becomes cluttered with anguish, betrayal is not your only competition. Life partners might end up rivals on a chessboard designed for more than just honour. It's when lineage extends just beyond the kitchen, since every knight could scrape through cutthroat social dynamics. You see, back in the medieval era, marriage wasn't initiated over candlelit dinners, but was more of a real estate transaction with a side of, "Oh, did I mention I come with a horse?" Love often took a backseat to alliances, land deals, and occasionally just the sheer necessity of keeping your family line intact, even if that meant marrying off a teenager to a man who only just got his first grey hair. Imagine, if you will, the noble families exchanging not vows but pleasantries and dowries like they were trading cards, only instead of collecting shiny holographic versions of your favourite warriors, they aimed to collect territory, livestock, and influence. "Ours is the land with the best water source," Mrs. Peasant would say as she forced her daughter into an ill-fated betrothal. "We'll take your son in return for a few grazing sheep." Because nothing says love quite like a freshly traded ewe. Children didn't really have a say in this rigged game. At best, they were like pawns, dropped without explanation on the chessboard of fate, usually never to see the light of choice again until a flock of sheep came knocking. And speaking of children, let's not forget the eerie sense of competition among siblings. You were groomed for greatness, but a younger sibling was just one birth away from stealing your glory, or marrying that dreamy knight who, to be fair, has about as much charisma as a soggy slice of bread. Your parents threw lavish parties for your cousin's wedding while you were left to wonder if you'd end up as the old maid living in your parents' shadow, while your siblings had become kings, knights, and lords' wives. Think of family gatherings in the wealthy class as essentially a battlefield, where the true stakes were who pulls off the biggest lavish botched-up wedding, while everyone else quietly plots the demise of your sense of future. Then there were affairs, oh boy. Little secrets tucked away in thatched roofs and bedchambers. Nobles seemed to have a knack for finding love in all the wrong places, back alleys, behind the castle stables, or even in their own sister-in-law's skirts. It was practically a pastime, vowed to marry one person, and yet always playing footsie with someone else. If you were the lucky spouse, you spent your evenings locked in the understanding of what drama was about to unfold when social status took precedence over your feelings, over and over again. Imagine explaining that to your friends at the market. "Ah, yes, my husband's off with this baker's daughter again. Wonder if their bread is any better than the last batch." And let's not forget about the consequences. Jealousy can ignite faster than a medieval arrow, and who wouldn't want to duel over the affections of a particularly charming lord or lady? If you ever found yourself on the wrong end of a blunt sword concerning a lover's adventures, congratulations, you just leveled up in the medieval relationship game. Life partners could just as easily turn into rivals, and you'd better pray that noblemen didn't take quite the liking to that jester with awkward dance moves at the latest gala. That's a recipe for betrayal served on a medieval platter, garnished with "oops, we accidentally duelled at dinner," and "I guess I'll be dining with the crows tonight." While the common folk struggled merely to survive with their own slow-burning romances and heartbreaking losses, the nobility faced a whole new world of betrayal adorned in fine fabric. They competed with politicking more ruthless than any local tavern brawl, where fealty felt about as solid as a castle built on sand. Tragedy formed beautifully extravagant love stories that could only rival the most scandalous of soap operas. Daydreams of knights and chivalry were but puffs of air, as you realised noble unions often felt like high-stakes poker, with everyone trying to bluff their way to glory. And so, dear listener, as you drift into the medieval romantic haze, remember that castles weren't just stone fortresses. They were theatres of human drama, where love and betrayal danced to the clanking rhythm of armour, often with more casualties than a drunken tavern brawl. So, as you lay your head to rest with visions of dashing knights, just know the reality was far less glamorous. Romance may sparkle on the surface, but underneath, it's a bubbling cauldron of competition, betrayal, and surprise endings. Much like a bad history book you never asked for. Now, if you think the castle court is friendly, let me introduce you to Noble Conspiracies. It's less Game of Thrones and more mediocre soap opera life here, deciphering who did what on the grand chessboard of social advancement. Let the games begin, as everyone thinks of their next best move while studying the art of backstabbing like they've earned a PhD. In this realm of glittering gowns and armoured knights, loyalty is as fragile as a freshly baked pie under a clumsy servant's foot. Trust, my dear listener, is the ultimate delicacy, one that you should savour but expect to see devoured before you can even steal a bite. Picture this. You've just entered the Great Hall, a grand space filled with banners that flutter like the whims of nobles hovering around you. The chatter has a hum of camaraderie, but look closely and you'll see the envy simmering just below the surface. It's a social tightrope walk where one misstep could lead you to become a tragic tale told for generations, much like the one about Lord Wiggleboots, who lost his lands after attempting to overthrow Lady Knittington for her prized collection of pet bunnies. Alas, his plot was overheard by a particularly nosy squirrel, and we all know how ruthless nature can be in protecting its realm. As you navigate these treacherous waters, remember to keep your ears open for the latest rumours. They spread faster than the common cold in a straw-filled dwelling. Last week, Lady Gossipel was heard discussing the mysterious disappearance of Lord Banterhand's prized falcon, and whispers of poisoned pigeons flit through the air during supper. Don't forget that in medieval society, the first rule of hospitality is to smile while secretly wishing your neighbour's livestock would spontaneously combust. If you don't offer a wicked smile to your rivals, who will? Dinner parties at the castle. Oh, they're where the real plots unfold. Imagine a spread fit for a king, but beneath the veneer of roast boar and fine wines, there lies the bitterness of envy and ambition. Goblets clink, and as the laughter rises, so does the satisfaction of valid, fabricated alliances. "I'll toast to your health, dear cousin," you hear, while simultaneously being stabbed with a fork of ill wish. The banquets may be grand, but it's not the dishes that leave the tastiest lingering flavour. It's the venomous exchanges that marinate in the minds of those lucky enough to sit beside you. Note to self: avoid the venison stew served by that particular cousin. It's always served with a side of betrayal. But what really keeps this court buzzing are the secret meetings in candle-lit alcoves, the hushed, frantic whispers about who might be next in line for the throne. Or worse, who shall be next to accidentally miss a step while traversing a particularly treacherous castle corridor? Dare I speak of Lord Reddish's unfortunate fall? Quite the climactic exit, wasn't it? In hushed tones, nobles describe such accidents as if planning to rehearse them for the next Grand Royal picnic. One rumour has it that Lady Fluffypants had previously tried to make a muffin with a hidden treasure. Heathens thought the hidden gold nugget was for decoration, but alas, it was all part of a nefarious plot. In these hallowed halls, every face is cloaked in a mask, and the longer you stand there, the more aware you become that history is always being rewritten around you. The prize isn't just power, mind you, it's the spectacle of it all. The grand stories told in ornate tapestries, where the less noble become mere footnotes in tales of bewitching schemes. They are the unfortunate souls overlooked, while the real heroes plot their moves like chess pieces on a board, where checkmate means something far more horrifying than losing a game. And don't get me started on the court jesters, those sharp-tongued entertainers who play the dual role of comic relief and truth-teller. "Your Majesty, your crown shines brighter than your flops," they jest. A subtle reminder that while you may sit as king or queen today, fortune's favour is as fickle as a courtier's smile. It is they who whisper the undying truths masked in laughter, and if you happen to walk too close you might overhear the latest juicy tidbit, destined to end in a big reveal at the next feast. So as you wander among these stone walls swathed in velvet grandeur, remember, the comforting facade of camaraderie is built on the foundations of conspiracy. To survive in this game, practice your backstabbing skills, both figuratively and literally. After all, in this world of knights, ladies, and shattering loyalties, every day is just another chance at the ultimate dramatic affair, where you might just find yourself outsmarting your most trusted allies over a rather unfortunate chicken dinner. And while the tension builds in the castle, let's not forget our good old friend, nature. When it comes to natural disasters, even an overcast sky could signal doom. Blizzards, floods, or a bad harvest. Things will go sideways faster than you can say, "Please don't smite me." Imagine waking up to a sky darker than your future on a Monday morning. You shake off the uneasy feeling in the pit of your stomach as you squint through the single, grime-coated window of your hovel, and alas, the ominous clouds rumble like a disgruntled dragon, ready to unleash chaos upon your already dreary existence. Now, a medieval storm isn't just a humble shower. No, this is nature throwing a full-on tantrum. As the winds whip through the thatched roof, it feels less like a gust and more like a personal attack. The rain pelts down in a fierce, relentless fury, turning your modest dwelling into the world's least enticing water park. You think about the crops outside, the ones you've lovingly tended to and prayed over while trying to repel thoughts of famine. They're now drowning faster than the last hope you had for a good harvest. And don't forget about the wayward blizzard. When winter decides to throw a hissy fit, it brings along frigid winds that penetrate your clothes like tiny daggers. You're dressed in layers of wool that smell roughly like a cross between a wet dog and yesterday's bread. Welcome to your winter wonderland. More hell freezes over than happy Christmas. You huddle in front of your hearth, which has been accommodating enough to burn just about everything, though without firewood, it might as well be a glorified grilling option for the stray rat who appears to be your only consolation. As for floods, let's not paint them as romanticized rivers flowing serenely past a quaint village. No, we're talking about the kind where water creeps into your hut like an unwelcome party crasher. You wake up one morning to find yourself knee-deep in water, wishing your biggest issue was just a spilled mug of ale. Instead, it's becoming painfully clear that you're now sharing your abode with an assortment of frogs who take comfort in the thought that jumping into your haystack is the ultimate party move. Surprise! Welcome to your new life as a reluctant amphibian landlord. And don't even get me started on the allure of a bad harvest. Imagine this. You've worked all season, pushing the limits of human endurance, while your back screams louder than your neighbour's goat. When the time comes to reap the fruits of your labour, you discover that a blight has swept through your crops faster than gossip about the local tavern brawl. You gaze upon plants that look more like the sad remnants of a bad haircut than anything edible. Suddenly, every meal becomes a guessing game of what can we create with 3 shriveled carrots and a sprig of wilted parsley. In the realm of medieval disasters, there aren't many delightful surprises waiting at the end of your day. Just when you manage to gather some meagre provisions from those crumbling harvests, the worst of luck appears in the form of pillaging marauders. Your anxiety skyrockets as you witness your fellow villagers being pursued by raiders, their screams echoing through the hills like a medieval banshee wail. Picture yourself clinging to your last sack of flour while dashing for cover, praying the only thing that gets raided is your neighbour's collection of cringeworthy bard tales. Let's not ignore the irony embedded within these nature-induced catastrophes. Just as you start to think your luck couldn't possibly sink lower, you hear the church bells chime loudly, summoning everyone to an emergency prayer session. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? Here you are, navigating the treacherous waters of survival, only to be reminded that there's someone watching who's probably taking bets on your chances of making it through the winter. So as nature unleashes its stormy temperament upon you and your fellow villagers, as you endure floods, blizzards, and a spike in rodent populations, remember, you're not just surviving, you're winning at an increasingly absurd game of medieval survival. And while you're stuck hoping for sunshine to break through those grey clouds, take a moment to appreciate the chaos around you. Because in the true spirit of the era, nothing feels grander than a good laugh at calamity when you have no control over it. And then there's your friendly neighbourhood nobleman, all in a flair for the dramatic. When squabbling over dinner grows tense and certain disputes turn into food fights turned duels, one thing leads to another. A whole affair over a meal where the stakes are much higher for nobles than mere peasants. Imagine a grand banquet hall with banners hanging like sad, droopy socks, the smell of roasted meat wafting through the air, and a lavishly adorned table groaning under the weight of dishes you wouldn't dare serve at a modern dinner party, if you could afford modern food. There you are, seated next to a lord whose sense of tragedy matches his waistline, diving into a plate of squab, that's fancy talk for pigeon, and pretending that the squirrel meat hidden behind the rich sauces hasn't been a hot topic of debate among the kitchen staff. As a peasant, you're often stuck lounging on the floor, ear to the ground, eavesdropping on the unfolding drama. Just last week, you overheard a baron challenging another about the superiority of their respective falcons. Dear heavens, it escalated quickly. The dinner became a grand spectacle, where accusations flew faster than the roasted geese. Before you know it, feathers are flying, and rather than ducking for cover, two noble families end up dual-calling over their goose-stealing gallant's honour. At this banquet, the stakes are higher than your living quarters, but your only official role, to fill your stomach with cold soup served on a creaky table and feign interest in the cheese platter that could use a serious health inspection. No medieval dinner party is complete without an element, or many, of poisoning, an unfortunate but common occurrence. Instead of heartfelt apologies, nobles often express regret over misplaced salt with a knife's edge and a grinning grin. After all, nothing says I utterly loathe you, quite like a flavourful dish that isn't just seasoned with herbs, but also lightly drizzled with the whispers of betrayal. Imagine the tension as lords swirl around one another, like poorly scripted actors brought to life by pageantry and pretense. Every clink of their forks and every exaggerated laugh hides the reality of potential foul play. If your cousin went hunting for herbs, could she just as easily be harvesting revenge? As a witness to these theatrics, you're fast realising that the difference between a nobleman and a peasant is similar to the difference between a skydiving adventure and a slow walk through a cow pasture. One offers a thrill, and the other, well, drudgery takes shape. As you hung on to your last servings of bread like it depended on having enough sustenance to hold you over in this grand culinary war, you briefly fantasize about cushy pillows, fresh linens, and a bed not shared with a goat. Because let's be real, if you ever had your heart's desire fulfilled, the last thing you'd want is to end up as an impromptu centerpiece in a grand duel. Courts were rife with characters ready to stage the most ridiculous escapades. And when it came to noble brutality, these conflicts were not just contained to lavish dinners. Step onto the battlefield, and you would have thought the tragedies of Shakespeare blossomed into a grand comedic theatre. Dueling nobles engaged in epic contest for honour, but often didn't realise they'd make better characters in a farce than the tragedies they presumed. When swords clashed, the melodrama was thick enough to cut, leaving behind more gossip than glory. Suddenly witnessing a lord fall flat on his face while attempting a spectacular sword sweep, you couldn't help but think, was this supposed to be heroic, or just a poorly rehearsed dance routine? As laughter erupted and meals became distant memories, you learned that nobility had its perks. Like a predilection for oral traditions and entertainment rife with hiccups that only highlighted their flaw to be human. In every dramatic display of ego you found some consolation. Despite their grand castles and vaulted ceilings, they still stumbled when it came to life's simplest challenges. But don't mistake this as advocacy for a noble life. The tumultuous flirtation with disaster meant each day was a calculated gamble between grace and potential embarrassment. The pompous illusion that wealth could conquer maturity or wisdom was crashing down. So as you sit cross-legged on the hay-scented floor, nursing your rough-and-tumble existence, you might be laughing at the absurdity unfolding before you, all while secretly thanking your stars that your life doesn't depend on maintaining a sense of superiority while juggling the fate of others amidst inescapable mediocrity. And thus, here you are, living your life that's offstage, rooted in reality, free from the pretenses of familiar faces smiling on predicaments they wouldn't dare face. While the nobles battle over the perceived stakes of honour and entitlement, you continue in the shadows, shaping your fate with a warm loaf of bread and the belief that tomorrow's banquet might hold better chopsticks. Or, any utensils at all. Class distinctions enforced by force create heavy burdens for you as a medieval player. No prizes await for lavish heroes when everything folly depends on who brands you. The accolades of your noble lord hinge on the number of cattle or proximity to royal pleasure. This isn't just a power struggle, it's game over visibility. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your future is determined not by your skills or abilities, but rather by the accident of your birth. Congratulations, you were born into poverty. You might have aspirations, dreams, or even a well-honed skill in weaving, but that's about as valuable as a chicken in a house of turkeys. If you strut your stuff too close to the noble circle, watch out. You might draw the ire of the knight in a shiny suit of armour, who believes to have and to hold means holding the right to wield a sword. Your lord, meanwhile, sits atop a throne of distress while fiddling with his gold goblet. He's waiting for tributes, not explicit social interactions. The lord's achievements aren't measured by humility or capacity for understanding, but instead by the sheer number of peasants buried under that obligation. Thank you for your taxes, your suffering is commendable. Yet somehow they expect you to smile while handing over your hard-earned pennies, even as their feasted tables groan under the weight of excess and arrogance. Probably the most entertaining aspect of this power dynamic is the social hierarchy that resembles a game of medieval chess, but one where the pawns frequently find themselves at the bottom, having both feet firmly planted in the muck. Your choices are as limited as selection at a tavern catering specifically to drunkards. It's ale or nothing. The affluent class gets to boast about their lavish affairs, throwing around grand feasts and sending elaborate invitations while you're observing from the corner, one tear-stained cheek smeared against the rough wood of the feast hall's wall. Ever try snapping a selfie in a sea of opulence? That's essentially your reality. Living as a peasant means attending events you can't participate in. Only the noble class gets to eat the actual meat at the banquet, unless, of course, you're lucky enough to score a position as a scullery maid. Even then, welcome to a daily regimen that feels less like work and more like survival in an octopus-infested storm. You're kneeling by the hearth, stoking dying embers, while everyone else is hammering their declarations of greatness. Now that's a recipe for envy, smelling the roast while being stuck with the nighttime duty of washing the banquet's baffling leftovers. Of course, you can always aspire to improve your lot by working hard in the fields. That's a common refrain among villagers. They gather around and chatter about the opportunities that await should fortune suddenly bestow itself upon them. But perhaps the sweetest irony lies in that sentiment, the endless cycle of labouring for someone else's satisfaction, while clutching your dreams like iron shackles at a chain gang. The land may yield crops if it feels generous, or it may send droughts or floods to remind you of its capriciousness. And then there's the ever-shifting landscape of favouritism. If you're too good at your job, get ready for your neighbour to spill the rumour of disloyalty, leading to all sorts of punishments that even the local jail couldn't accommodate. Now friends, let's not pretend that all nobles possess wisdom or charisma. Some can barely formulate words during their annual bless the crop speech. You might find yourself enduring a patron who's one the less, ite blanks towards your concerns. If life were a stage, you've officially filled the role of the invisible courtier, quietly waiting your turn amid a cacophony of who's more noble. News breaks like ice underfoot. The shifting allegiances of those in power spark intrigue, akin to a sobering episode of a medieval reality show, because each won't just defend their kingdom, they'll do so by having you serve alongside them while they plot their intrigues to trap each other. And while noble jousts fill the space between life's reality and myth, the real wars wage on the ground where you cultivate the soil like yourself, striving silently from dawn to dusk, with discussion covering topics like swollen bellies and whether you can afford bread this week. When neighbours discuss tomorrow's harvest under the light of a flickering candle, you hear laughter crack from behind every smile. But beneath that surface, many silently wonder who'll be trampled yesterday as tomorrow kicks off the search for sustenance, illustrating in stark relief how class structures can turn allies into competitors in the time it takes to enjoy a piece of bread. Welcome to life as a medieval player, where sharpening your skills might just get you noticed, but mostly only attention on how hard you work and how little you possess in this grand farce they dare call the feudal system. On the final note, let's think of mortality as your omnipresent ghost. Family lineage can fade in the light of a new dawn, while memories hold on to the tears left behind. Did you carve a mark or trace singeing through history's pages? Earn your place before the dirt plot closes in like stages of a well-planned tragedy. In medieval times, the end of the road came earlier than most would have liked. Life expectancy hovered around the 30 to 40 year mark, primarily due to diseases that travelled through the air like gossip at a village gathering. Yes, whether it was dysentery, a bad batch of pottage, or a particularly feisty rat with a vendetta, fate was fickle and often deadly. Picture yourself at the town square at dusk, where the townsfolk are distractedly pondering their next meal. You glance around and see that you are indeed less than half the age of the rickety trees surrounding the place. Everyone's looking rather haggard as they gather to remember the recently departed. Spoiler alert, that could be you in no time. Families took it on the chin, gathering around to share fond memories, standing vigil over their loved one's grave like it was the new Netflix series trending this summer. Mourning customs were elaborate, often leaving the deceased dressed in their Sunday best, and by that I mean whatever slightly less filthy clothing you could find lying under the hay in your mud hut. Funerals, as you can imagine, were a real blast. If by blast I mean a hasty affair more akin to removing what's left of a broken piñata. If there's any hope for a tricky, morbid twist, it involves a quick burial slapdash enough that no one even bothers to check the depth of your final resting place. No ornate coffins, no heartfelt eulogies, just a plot of earth and a few hastily mumbled prayers as your loved ones nervously shuffle away like they just told the bartender they'd eat the last turnip. If the ground is frozen, a hasty burial might even mean sitting in limbo for a while. Or worse, the town undertaker claiming you still owe him for last year's barley. But let's not get too grim. Even death had its perks, particularly in the form of rich snacks for the living. Gatherings filled with giant pots of stew, possibly thickened up with the last bit of your remaining family members. Let's not pretend sanity was a key ingredient. In many places, such ceremonies were the one time people managed to enjoy a decent meal without worrying about keeping up appearances. The catch? Be careful not to nod too hard while recounting their life, or you might unintentionally dig your own grave. A little improperly timed humour, and the next shovel of dirt could be for you, rather than the poor unfortunate soul you just departed. If you were to kick the bucket, don't count on being immortalised by grand monuments or statues. In fact, you'd be more likely remembered through the whispers of a neighbour describing the great turnip fracas of 1306 than any oversized portrait in a local hall. The surviving family members might glance at your picture, a portrait with necklines extending deeper than any commiseration ever could, and wonder just what part of life led them to such remarkably miserable existence. You become nothing more than a chapter lost in the order of chaos, your legacy fading like that last autumn leaf clinging desperately to a tree branch before a storm yanks it to the ground. Now let's take a moment to reflect on the children. For many, beyond the joys of playing with Legos made of dirt, they were often expected to contribute to the family duties well before they hit their pre-teens. When you didn't die from the plague at a tender age, You instead traded childhood's innocence for hard labour in the fields, and for most, an early grave was just a way to sidestep the daunting yoke of adulthood that looms overhead like a giant crow waiting to nab a morsel of fresh meat. In the end, whether you cherished or loathed your existence, a solid burial plot became the ultimate goal. Hawk-eyed crows circling overhead, offering grim commentary on your life trajectory. Because medieval life had one unyielding truth: the end always sneaks up when you're least prepared. And so, with your heart still racing from the rigours of survival, you leave this world and enter the next, likely via a plot that's already enjoyed more rain than your personality ever could. Because just like that crumbling castle or rancid pottage served too often, life was as fleeting as it was miserable, painted only by the whims of fate and smothered in dirt. With all the daily struggles leading into enduring legacies of survival, whether it's hunting for something to eat or making it through the day without being murdered at the hands of invading hordes, there becomes that occasional reminder: life's a wild ride filled with hardships and hilarity, a reality no fairy stories can quite capture, but still stands firm despite the relentless chaos. In fact, it's difficult to find a single medieval day that didn't involve some sort of calamity. Truly, if the bard were around today, he'd be cranking out tragedy comedies faster than you can say Lord of the Flies. Let's navigate the castle life in its entirety, because in the world of lords and vassals, the banquet's glory is juxtaposed against the grim duties awaiting the common folk. Your lord's gluttonous gorging at the grand feast seems excessive, but it's all balanced by the harrowing fact that their wealth is built on your blood, sweat and tears, and perhaps a few unfortunate mice who wandered too close to the banquet table. But as long as you remain in the warmth of the castle walls, far away from the dreary, unsightly realities of the village, that is what truly counts, right? Oh, if only you could convince the village folk to stop tossing pig entrails in the moat. At the same time, you can't forget the dignity of the peasant family residing in the hovel next door, earning their keep through back-breaking labour while their offspring scamper barefoot through mud and manure. A recipe for joy that really captures the medieval spirit. Really, can you imagine? Their warm greetings every morning might be met with sticky hands and eyes that scream, "Please feed us." Between the collective dreams of prosperity and the harsh taste of potato stew, sometimes all you can do is break out in laughter. Ever tried to conjure a sympathetic smile while gnawing on a piece of hard bread that might as well be crafted from leftover castle bricks? And when night falls, you pray to every known deity that whatever lurking monsters or gentlemen of ill repute remain just that: gossip. Because you can bet your last half-criminal coin that lurking shadows often come paired with the kind of adventures that would scare the bravest knight. Imagine stumbling into a castle on a dark night, only to find not a throne fit for a kingship, but a chamber of confused mice fighting over a piece of stale muffin. The utter absurdity of it seems farcical. Even noble births are surrounded by chaos. Labour takes hours, and you can only pray your baby doesn't end up with the misfortune of being born with scales. What's worse? If it turns out you've just given birth to the new village fool, a title your dear sweet child will wear like a badge of honour and a future as inevitable as a bad harvest. Let's pivot around to the peasant. If you can endure an awe-inspiring tale of regulated chaos, let's talk about the unglamorous art of meal prep. Remember your comforting thought from breakfast. Yes, the lukewarm porridge that made your stomach ache and your mind question life. Those lavish rewards of your work leave only a memory behind when you realise that supper is the same adaptability on varied days, with one possibility: burnt meat. Your gathering of veggies becomes a scavenger hunt through freezing mud, vying for the last sound morsel for survival against your family's impressive appetite. But even in the midst of overwhelming despair, the clever peasant soul finds pockets of humour. a stolen vegetable here, a complaint about hard labour there, and soon the village becomes a tapestry of stories spun with laughter. Picture them huddled around the hearth as they share tales of misadventures, or in this case, the time a misguided chicken suddenly became the village's honorary knight during a failed raid. Then, before you can even tip your hat to the optimism of these characters, the sun fades and the cycles repeat. Life within these stone walls, crudely plastered huts, and crops that simply refuse to grow carries on through relics of suffering. However, the laughter holds it together like a knight's armour. So there you have it, in a nutshell, the hilarity, the misfortunes, all of it weaving together to create the view of life, one that no sanitised retelling can ever adequately portray. Forget the gilded frames. The essence of living in a medieval castle or its neighbouring village is in the dangled laughs from absurdities, surprising levity, and of course, just plain volume with life being what it truly is. From tangled histories and jumbled lives all stitched together like an awkward yet resilient tapestry, now that's medieval living in a nutshell.